use their voice for evil? Those guys did. But in the beginning, in Greece times, the sophists were, the man is the measure of all things. Remember that expression? I had that up on one of your slides. So here's what I'm going to tell you. Know the sophists. There's a good chunk of change on this test that we'll talk about them, because they were so influential. Gracie, would you be attracted to someone who could influence you with your voice, with their voice? Can you name someone that you might be somewhat attracted to? And when I say attracted, not in a bizarre, crazy, weird way, but that you might be kind of wanting to hear more.
Motivational speakers. There's, I know one guy, and I forget his name, but he has no legs and no arms, and he's the most.
I saw that guy.
Yes, the most upbeat person, and obviously all he's using is his voice.
Yeah. How about, would you be interested in someone who could promise you a whole lot and you didn't really know, but he was good looking and he had a really nice image, or friends that looked the part, that they were very successful? You could get pulled into that, right? And they may not have any experience, but they just know how to melt your heart and bring you along, right? Well, I hate to say it, but that's how I see sometimes the sophists. Thank you. There she is. Hey, are you all done?
Yeah.
Congratulations. How'd it go?
Really well, actually.
I was wondering about you. I hope it went well. Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Very good. All right, we're just on to we're kind of moving to the Greek theorist right now, so
Okay.
we can pull your binder up. All right, so yes, know something on the sophist, you guys. That's going to be important.
Yeah.
Looks like I got 4 hours.
Yeah, congratulations.
No, it's all good. All right, the sophists are going to be important, and then I think I gave you some names of those. I'm not asking you to know everything, but just know who are the sophists, okay? And what were some of the names? One that stands out for me is Protagoras. He was highly influential. And if I use that expression on the test, man is the measure of all things, that means, you know what? All the values that we learned in our polis, that means nothing. It's all about what's best for me. Man is the measure of all things. That's what they would say. Okay? Now we got to jump into the 3 biggies. Plato, right? Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. I told you those are going to be really important, because Socrates, Aristotle, Plato, the rule. Socrates, what can you tell me about him? Anybody remember? How did he die? He committed suicide, right? He committed suicide. I kind of summarized everybody on these study guide sheets, the reading guide sheets. I gave a nice summary, a blanket summary of each of those gentlemen. But he was an idealist. Hannah, what's an idealist? How do you define it in your own words?
Yeah.
I know, you've had a lot on your plate today, so I don't want to.
Like someone who not wants the best, but
Could be. Hannah, you know what an idealist is?
Like someone who sees through rose-colored glasses.
Okay, that's the expression I had in mind, right? That was a great way to remember it. Who would look through life with rose-colored glasses. They always expect the best. The best, the best. Is there anything wrong with being an idealist? Paige, are you an idealist in some respect? I am. I'm an idealist. I have great hope in all the students I teach that they're going to be the best teachers in the world. But then I have to be a realist that some are going to struggle, right? But Socrates was an idealist. Started a school called the Lyceum. These are pertinent little information things that you should pull up about him. I would make if I were going to be studying for this test, I'd probably put on some of the key points. He talks about truth, beauty, knowledge. He was all about always exuding the best in mankind. The best of mankind. That rather than living, and he hated the sophists because they thought they were charlatans. They were people that were promising the world they couldn't deliver. They couldn't deliver. There's no way they could deliver. And he would say, what's Socrates' most famous gift to teaching? Something that we still even use to this day, called the Socratic method, right? And can someone define for me what that is? What is the Socratic method? Go ahead.
Isn't it like answering the question
It's teacher asks questions, students respond, you're trying to get them to think deeper, right? Deeper in thought, and so you ask and you keep digging out questions. And Socrates, because he taught students to question, many people thought he was challenging the status quo just as bad as the sophists, so they put him on trial, and instead of waiting to be killed, he killed himself. He kind of walked, and that's it. Boom. But here's who, we know everything about Socrates from whom? Plato is the most famous student. So here comes Plato, who came after. Plato was an idealist like his teacher. Isn't that funny? He was an idealist just like his teacher, so he followed in his teacher's footsteps. And I misspoke earlier. I said that Socrates started school. It's Plato's school is the Lyceum. My fault. And on my sheets, I give you some very important terms. So here's what I'm going to tell you about Plato. The most important thing you need to know about him is you better have a good understanding of what his book, what was his famous writing? I'm sorry. The Republic, right. It was a story that he wrote, a story that because he believed in the good of people, that people needed to be elevated and ask and seek for the best in people. And he wrote the Republic. Anybody know what the Republic was about? I have a nice summary of it on one of my slides. The Republic is his utopian idea of how education should look within their society. It could never have been met out, never. There's no way, he was too idealistic in his thinking. That if you didn't have the natural intelligence, and this is important, but you need to capture this right now, you do the reading. But Plato would say if you were naturally gifted and talented, you don't really have a place in society. That only the best, the brightest, the smartest are our leaders. And that's the purpose of school, to identify who are the best, the brightest, the most intelligent. And there's a lot there about Plato's Republic. So I would really encourage you to take a look at that guy. He's an idealist. Okay? Socrates, student. We know everything about Socrates from this guy. Socrates never wrote a thing, he just talked, and Plato wrote down his ideas. And I'm glad, Anna, you remembered those visuals sometimes happen. You can see them, the rose-colored glasses. Okay, now, here comes the question. What's a realist? Jenny, what's a realist?
That's a good question.
Are you a realist?
I guess.
So here's the question. Let me make it really bizarre. I say, you've just been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Terrible. How would a realist react? Anybody want to take a shot? How would a realist respond to that?
Like, that's it.
That's it. Yeah. Realistically, my life is numbered. I may have 3 months. I may have 4 months. How would an idealist respond? There's still great hope. Guess what? They just came out with a drug that knocked out this or that. They're idealists. They think bigger picture. They think there's a way to get around that. Now, I've said that not to me. I'm just saying that's sometimes people look at life idealistically. Are you going to be idealistic about this test, or you can be a realist about this test? You got to think about it, right? I mean, I hope you're being idealistic. You're going to be ready to rock and roll. Socrates was a realist. I'm sorry, Aristotle. Did I say Socrates? Yes, thank you for straightening me out. You're a realist. You're straightening me out all the time. All right, so here comes this guy named Aristotle who had Plato as his teacher. So here you got teacher, student, teacher, student. Aristotle was a realist. And like Plato, who always had his head in the sky, thinking about how things should ideally be, Aristotle said, that's not realistic. We have to look to the world. We have to see things as they really are, the objective order of the world. So he's always considered to be the father of realism. His knowledge existed in the world around him. He used his senses, he used sight, He used feel. And obviously, very different than his teacher, Plato, who was idealistic. I give you a lot of information about Aristotle. I don't go into great detail about him because some of you are going to ask yourself, I'm going to be asking you, are you the realist or are you the idealist when it comes to dealing with kids? You may start out the school year as an idealist. This is going to be the best school year ever. And then 2 days down the road, you're going like, oh, this is not the best school year ever. Now you're an idealist. You're realizing, oh no, kids throw up, they poop their pants, they run out of the room, they scream and yell, all these crazy things, right? But you start out the year being an idealist. The important thing is don't ever lose being an idealist in some respect. Never lose hope in your students, never. Okay, so Aristotle was that realist. He was the father of realism. He looked outward into the world. He didn't look inside the mind like Plato did, trying to draw out information that were already just hidden inside your body, or hidden in your mind and had to be drawn out, the Socratic method. He looked to science. He looked to organization. It was very interesting. And I have misspoken one time more. Aristotle's school was the Lyceum. Lyceum, so scratch. Lyceum, third time round.
If we write that all three of them.
Yeah, no. Plato's school is the academy. My bad, I got the first time. Plato's school is the academy. You all should have something like page has, you just knock it off real quick,
Yeah,
right?
I just like moved it
Hey,
down.
does that just type it then when you put it into it?
No, I just used it.
Okay, that's awesome. That's cool. All right, Plato's school is the academy. Who's Plato's teacher? Socrates, right? And Aristotle's school was, I've now made a mistake, you got it from the Lyceum.
Does Socrates have a school?
No, he didn't. Remember, he was put to death before he even put to school. In fact, you know what Plato did after his teacher was put to death? I hope you do that for me. If I went out and had to be put to death, or I committed, I don't know if you know, I won't commit suicide. But he wandered for 3 years out in the wilderness. He was so distraught by the fact that his teacher was not.
You hope we wander?
I hope that you would have a little more meaning, yeah, maybe not 3 years, not in the wilderness. Maybe Las Vegas. or something.
I'm hoping if something happens, we all take a vacation.
Yeah.
There you go, yeah, okay, got it.
Go find ourselves.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
Florida, maybe.
Gosh, I've been around for a while, so don't worry. Okay, I would ask you to do one last thing for me on this section, because we didn't hit the last two. We didn't really go into greater detail with Aristotle. But remember, he was the realist. He looked to objective order in the world. He looked to science to help organize things. He did not follow he was completely different than his teacher in that respect. Whereas Plato was such an idealist, Aristotle said, I look through clear-colored lenses that are going to really give us hope for what really what needed to be seen and understood. Okay? Questions on Greek theory? Claire, I'm glad to see you here. It's okay. Yeah. We've been going through for almost 45 minutes. Now we're going to look at Rome. So obviously, when we look at Rome, it's what's the big thing you should remember about Rome? What happened to, even though Rome conquered the world, they conquered the Greek world, but how did the Greeks still conquer the Greeks in their own subtle way? Katie.
Rome had to learn the language of the Greeks and their culture.
Kate, why? You're right, 100%. Why?
Because Rome spoke Latin, they couldn't communicate when they took over.
Okay. So when they began to conquer all of the Mediterranean, there were all these Greek ports, the Greek trading posts, and everybody saw Greek as the language of the trading that took place on the Mediterranean. So even though they were the mighty Romans who spoke Latin, everybody had to learn Greek in order to communicate, right? So even though, and there's that, remember that quote I have in there about a captive, was it, who can find that on your sheets? captive Rome and captive Latinums to Greek. It's in the Latin, excuse me.
Captive Greeks to captive for savage
Yep.
conquer and brought
Yeah,
civilization.
that's what that means, right? Captive, they took charge of the, even though they took the land, the Greeks captured the Romans through their system of schooling, educating, and their languages. And in order to know, so if you were gonna be successful in Roman trading, you had better know Greek. By the way, is Greek a spoken language today? Have you heard anybody speak Greek? Opa, Opa, there's Greek. I just spoke it. You know what that is? Opa. Opa. Okay, Opa is a German, Opa is it is a German word, but Opa means like cheers. Our pastors all speak Greek, because they say the New Testament, New Testament was written in Greek, the New Testament. But yes, a very difficult language to understand. And in Greece, they still speak it. All right, Rome, Latin. Anybody take Latin in high school? Some people say Latin is a dead language, but if you know Latin, you know pretty much the basis of many languages. All right, so what do I want to tell you to make sure you remember? In addition to reading the reading guides I gave you, I'm showing you, I keep saying it over and over again because I think it's really important that you do that. Those are there for your, and looking over those questions. A couple things I'm going to say to you about. So, would you say education early? Was it informal or formal education in Rome? Informal, right? Just again but how was education different for the Roman culture? Someone played a very important role in the Roman culture that not a Greek role. Who was that? Mothers, right? So ladies, you're all here. This is your time to roar and talk about the roaring of. I always tell my wife when I come home from class that night, what did you teach about today? And I said, Roman mothers and the important role they played, right? Up to age 7. But then who became the teacher after age 7? And what was probably the most important thing? In addition to initiating them to Roman culture, drama, religion, what was the most important thing a father could give to his kids, his son? I'm sorry?
Teaching them how to be like good citizens.
Okay, that's all plays into this. You're exactly right. And boy, you should really try to embellish on that and talk about that. But what's the other thing? What do we call that? Be a good citizen. Follow the laws, right? And that was where that law, the 12 tablets or 10 tablets, right? Every young man needed to know that. Those are very important, absolutely. I do talk about the patricians and the plebeians. You know, those are the ancient people of Rome, right? In the city-state, patricians were the wealthy landowning, whereas the plebeians were the lower class. But what caused them to disappear? I mean, there were no longer any classes, but they began to do what? Marry into each other, right? And some of the classes just broke down. So they became what we know today as the Roman people. You may see something like this, a toga. What's a toga? You've all been at a toga party. Don't tell me you haven't. Have you ever gone to a toga party?
Where do you think we are?
That's true. There's no Greek life.
Are we having a toga
Have
party?
you?
We could.
Should we have
You know what?
Can we?
I think should everyone
with
class?
cheese?
Yeah.
Toga. No, one time I came to class and I taught this in a toga.
Should we go to the test?
Yeah, can we have toga?
No.
Toga Tuesday. Toga Tuesday.
Toga Tuesdays. No, I did wear it one time. I walked across campus, someone took a picture of it, and they put it in the school newspaper. And I didn't know it. They were seeing me from behind me, so they snapped with their phone. And I came in, and the kids were like, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm wearing the toga." At my age, I'd wear what type of toga? Toga, verillas. I'm more than just a kid. I'm now an adult. I'm on the back end of life. But togas, yeah. Yeah, and there could be things like some of the laws, the pietas, the pudor. Make sure you maybe kind of look them over, because that could be one of your definition terms, right? All right, we already talked about how captive Greece took captive for savage conquerors. Talks very much about that. So really, in addition to laws, Claire said it, and I would just want to reiterate this. This would be very important in Roman culture: citizenship. citizenship, how you're supposed to behave and be a Roman citizen. I gave you, now we start seeing formal schools coming into play in Rome. That's the first place we start seeing actual Roman schools, formally schools. So we see this thing called a ludus. I would suggest that those are terms you might want to make sure you know. A ludus, a pedagogue. What's a pedagogue? Yes, it's a tutor that teaches, right? If you're wealthy enough, your dad could afford, he might hire someone to teach you Greek so that maybe one day you could go out and trade and be influential throughout the Roman Empire, right? Very important. And then in addition to some of the secondary schools, there were two secondary schools that are important, critically important. And they are the Greek grammar school, and the Greek grammar school, and then followed shortly by the Latin grammar school. Come on in, I'm glad you're here. Did you win?
No.
The Latin and so first the Greek grammar school, which is really for young men between the ages of 10 to 16. Just know that Latin and Greek were very important in their culture. And that's going to be huge. Okay? Of those two, the Latin and the grammar schools, which one came to America? The Latin grammar school did, yeah. Colonial America had Latin grammar schools everywhere. They existed as we go into the medieval period, all across Europe, but then they actually traveled across the Atlantic Ocean and they established those in the city of Boston. And one of the oldest high schools in the nation was a Latin grammar school, where the intelligence learned Latin. The people that were most gifted were learning the Latin language. So we talked about the ludus schools, we talked about, that's the elementary, secondary schools, which were like for maybe like high schools, Greek and Latin. And then we talked about, it wasn't a college, but this would be very important, just like it is to the Greeks, the rhetorical schools. What would they teach at the rhetorical schools? Katie, since you've been answering this question all along. Remember, what was the purpose of going to a rhetorical school?
I would be able to talk persuasively.
Okay, rhetorical studies, we really take the Greek idea of good speaker and mesh it together with the Roman ideas and Roman laws and how to be a great influential individual, right? So rhetorical schools were all about learning how to use one's voice for power. By the way, you know that the Romans we emulated in our government, the Senate, just like we have in our country. The Greeks gave that to us. That all comes out of these ancient times, the Greek and the Roman citizens as well. Then finally comes the very last two individuals, Cicero and Quintilius. And I can't not tell you something a little bit about them. But again, if you read this took a long time to put together, but I would tell you this, these reading guides really do a nice summary. You don't have to read the entire book. I would think that you shouldn't have to read the entire book again. God willing, you've read the book, you've answered the questions, but Quintilian and Cicero really become what we consider to be the two finest examples of teachers who saw the importance of orations. What would we call orations at WLC? I'm taking a class on orations. What's orations?
Communication.
See?
Communication.
Yeah, communication, speech, right? So they were orators. And so they took what was good from the Roman culture along with what was good in the Greek concepts of speaking, and they meshed them together. And the book that Cicero wrote is a term that you'll need to know. De oratorio. That's something I can talk Italian, I'm not. But the de oratorio is a very important curriculum for how to teach speech and to be influential with that ability to speak. It's a methodology. His partner is one that really plays a role, Quintilian. He was the Roman model of a teacher of rhetoric. But he had some ideas that came long before anybody else. Do you remember what that was? He saw the importance of, we never got to this in our slides, but they're there, they're on the reading guide. He saw the importance of developmental stages in education. That's why you remember. Quintilian was thinking you shouldn't teach little kids a certain way. You shouldn't teach kids all the same way. You have to know where they are as they walk along that path. So I give you a good slide on that. And if we look on page 13, or not page 13, not your page 13, I have a great summary on why is Quintilian significant in Western educational history. There are so many things that come out of Roman education, Quintilian's educational beliefs, that we still do today in America, and you have already learned about. Can you look at those real quickly? There's 4 of them listed, 5 of them listed. Recommended learning be appropriate. Good teachers make learning fun and attractive. He loved teaching in groups as opposed to individuals, which would be through a pedagogue, one-on-one, but teaching groups. What would be the value of teaching in groups? I mean, think about it. Do you want to be a tutor or do you want to be a classroom of 20? Well, why is it neat to have a group of 20? Jen, what do you think?
Because then you can get everyone else's perspectives and like combine it.
Okay, there's a whole lot more thinking going on, right? You get a lot more dialoguing going on, right? So did he. He thought that. He preferred group situations to tutoring, one-on-one. He found it much more exciting to be able to teach a group of students, which I have to feel the same way. Notice the 4th bullet point. I would agree with this. He recommended that learning begin as early as possible to get them away from their parents who ruined their children. How do you feel about that one? Anna, how do you feel about that? Do parents ruin their kids sometimes? You must, if anybody sees them, you must see some pretty bratty kids in your place. Spoiled, right? Can never do wrong. Kind of like what we're talking about in that book, right? So Quintilian was thinking so far in advance of his time that teachers need to get a hold of kids sooner than later, because keeping with their parents too long, ruin them. I don't know if I agree with that. I haven't raised kids. Maybe you'll agree with me after you have your own kids. And then finally, the last part, recognize the critical importance of early childhood experiences. All you early childhood people, if you forget that, shame on you. Okay, he recognized the absolute critical importance of early childhood experiences in shaping the character of kids. There's no other period in history or in schooling where you have greater influence on kids than early childhood. If they get to high school, they don't like English and they hate school. Kind of hard for Paige to go in there and change that. But when they come to school, everything is cool when they're in 1st grade or 2nd grade or kindergarten. They still love you, right? They still love you. Questions on Rome? Okay, should I repeat for those that were not here, just kind of give it to them one more time, just this one little bit of sharing? I know I told you to tell them. Here's the test. Here's what it looks like. Danny, he's going to own a beer someday when he graduates. All right, here's what it looks like, you guys. The test is 72 points in total. There are 10 definition words. There are 23 multiple choice, which are pretty obvious, I think. And then there are 3 essays. And by the way, I didn't mention this to all of you, and I'm going to tell you straight up. There are 3 essays. The first essay is on Greece, something in Greece. The second essay is going to be something on Rome. And the third essay will be something on writing your own personal philosophy of education. I tell you what the minimum word count has to be. So like in one of them, you have to write at least, well, for the first 2, you have to write at least 200 words. That's not that much. If you go beyond that, that's fine, but you gotta have a minimum of 200 words. And then there's a 5 credit extra credit essay if you choose to do that. You don't have to do that, it's up to you, it's up to you to decide that. Okay, so 10 definitions, and who can tell me how my definitions have to be answered? Katie, can you help that with Danny? Okay, real loud, so she can.
There are 2 points, so you have to have 2 aspects of the definition.
So when you see a term, you have to be able to tell me 2 things that happen or that are related to it, not just one. So you get 2 points. So if I said, if I had Danny's name on the test, and it's Danny Kane, you'd say, Danny Kane is a senior at WLC, there's one, and he plays baseball for WLC, there's two. So you gotta come up with two things that you remember from that, okay?
So it's not necessarily like a definition.
It can be whatever you want it to be, but it's gotta at least be 2 points that help me understand that you understand what that word means. Now, we've just spent an hour, exactly, we started right at 5 o'clock, and I'm really happy to see the number of people that are here. Are there any questions about anything I've said so far? And I know that, go ahead, Paige, I'm sorry.
It's okay, there's the one term on here, the doctrine of reminiscence, I don't
Yeah.
know if we're talking about it, or.
Okay, the doctrine of reminiscence, we did talk about this, that would be something that Plato would teach, that all the ideas, he's an idealist, that all you need to do is just draw out the information through the Socratic method to bring the ideas. They're all here, they're all in your mind, you just gotta have someone talk it through and bring it out.
I didn't remember the title.
Yeah, that was a more formal title,
Gotcha.
okay? Socrates believed that the ideas were all in your head, you just have to bring them out. All right, someone asked me one time about the first test, how long should I study? Don't, you know, sometimes I look at your timestamps of things when you study it, 2:58. Sorry, Dan. I look at it, oh man, how's that guy even get through the day? You know, study, and then just know that I'm gonna be in here on Tuesday morning at 6 o'clock. If you wanna get a jump, you can. I'll be around. I'll send out a note tomorrow, just remind everybody about that. Go ahead.
I have another question about
Go
a
ahead.
term. Is that okay? Okay. The idea versus matter.
Take it off, it's not gonna be on. Thank you for asking that. I rewrote the test. Okay. Kayla, any questions? You good? If you're good, you can go. We'll see you